All right, welcome. Today we're going to dive into a really fascinating idea. It starts with a well-known foundational story, but you'll see it ends with a pretty radical proposal for how we should think about the present. We're going to look at how one single historical puzzle can actually challenge our entire idea of certainty and maybe even shift our focus completely. Our source material really just lays it all out with this quote. It says, "The Mirage is one of the most important events, yet there is surprisingly little certainty about two key elements of it." And right there, that's the tension. That's the paradox at the very heart of this huge historical narrative. This clash between something being profoundly important and, at the same time, profoundly uncertain. So let's start by unpacking this puzzle. We're talking about the Mirage, which is this cornerstone narrative about a miraculous night journey. I mean, according to tradition, it's a truly pivotal moment. But as this analysis points out, this is exactly where the intellectual challenge really begins.
Now, the contradiction isn't about whether the event happened or not. It's more about the kind of information we actually have. On one hand, the story is packed with these incredibly specific, vivid details. But on the other hand, some of its most basic, fundamental aspects are just, well, they're shrouded in ambiguity. And that creates this tension that scholars have been debating for centuries.
And you can see that contrast so clearly here. On one side, you've got details that feel super clear, like the famous story of a negotiation that established the number of daily prayers. But on the other side, we've got these deep, unresolved questions. This perspective points out that the estimates for when the marriage even happened span a whole 7-year range. And maybe even more fundamentally, there's this ongoing debate. Was this a physical, literal journey, or was it a metaphorical, spiritual one? And this leads us to the big question, right? How can you have such incredible clarity on these smaller details, but at the same time have this total fog around the foundational facts? You know, this isn't just some historical quirk. It's a real intellectual problem that kind of invites us to look a little deeper at how these stories get passed down and preserved over time. So, this whole puzzle leads to something the source calls an inconvenient implication. And this is where the analysis really shifts. It goes from just pointing out a problem to exploring what that problem actually means for traditional ways of thinking about belief. That phrase, inconvenient implication, is so key here. It suggests that this ambiguity does way more than just spark a historical debate. It directly challenges any claim of having absolute certainty and a perfect, unbroken transmission of information. I mean, think about it. If the details of such a major event are this unclear, it kind of makes you wonder about the certainty we can have about other parts of the historical record. Now, what's crucial to understand is that this analysis isn't trying to argue for disbelief. Not at all. It's more about acknowledging that the historical texts we have today are, as the source puts it, conflicted and incomplete. It's pointing to a really natural loss of information over hundreds and hundreds of years that just makes it tough to claim perfect, unwavering certainty. Okay, so faced with this inconvenient implication, the analysis doesn't just critique and walk away. It actually introduces an alternative perspective, a whole framework designed to navigate these exact kinds of issues with historical uncertainty. And this framework is called BioIslam. Now, the source defines it as scientific Islam, but it's not really about lab coats and test tubes. It's more about a shift in method, a proposal to approach faith and its challenges with a completely different set of priorities, one that's grounded in analysis and, you guessed it, problem solving. At its core, the BioIslam framework is suggesting that instead of getting bogged down in these unresolvable debates about historical details, like the exact date or the exact nature of the Mirage, we should redirect our focus. It argues that we should be prioritizing tangible, contemporary problems that affect human welfare right here, right now. So, if the focus isn't on historical debates, what is it on? Well, this framework is built around a set of critical, real-world challenges that it calls the Big Five. And these are presented as the central mission, the main event. And here they are. According to this perspective, the 5 core priorities are tackling poverty, reversing brain drain, challenging authoritarianism, dismantling patriarchy, and countering politicization. This is a major pivot from the metaphysical to the material, from the past to the pressing issues of the present. Let's just quickly break these down. The source connects each one of these to a very real negative outcome. It argues that authoritarianism is what leads to taqlid, or blind faith, that patriarchy diminishes the potential of women, and that the politicization of faith is a direct cause of sectarianism. The whole goal here is to solve these big, systemic problems that are seen as holding back human progress.
Let's zoom in for a second on that word taqlid. The source defines it as blind faith, and it makes an explicit link to authoritarianism. The implication is pretty clear. Societies that don't have critical inquiry are way more vulnerable to authoritarian structures, which then end up stifling the very progress you need to solve all these other huge problems.
Okay, so with this new framework in mind, let's bring our discussion all the way back around. How does this problem-solving approach actually deal with the mystery of the Miraj that we started with?
Well, the answer is a pretty radical reframing of the question itself. From the BioIslam perspective, those specific, contested details of the Miraj, they're just accepted as being ultimately unknowable. But more importantly, they are considered not relevant to the core mission of tackling the Big Five challenges.
And this quote from the source material really is the final word on it from this perspective. It says it right there. We have no way of knowing for sure, and since it is not relevant to addressing the Big Five challenges, it's basically saying that since we can't know, and since knowing wouldn't help solve poverty or brain drain anyway, the debate itself is just a misallocation of our intellectual and spiritual energy. So in the end, the resolution being proposed here isn't some new historical theory that magically solves the mystery. The resolution is to just dissolve the mystery's importance by fundamentally shifting our priorities. It suggests that the real work isn't in perfecting our knowledge of the past, but in perfecting our world in the present. And this leads us to our final, broader philosophical point. I mean, if some questions are just deemed irrelevant, then what is the role of mystery and the unknown within a worldview like this? And what's so interesting is that the source material actually offers a powerful symbol for this very idea. It suggests that the concept of jinn can be understood not as literal beings, but as a symbol for the unknowable itself, all those aspects of reality that are just beyond our current understanding. It represents an embrace of intellectual humility, a way of acknowledging that not everything can be or even needs to be explained. And that leaves us with this final provocative question to think about. In any system of thought, whether it's religious or secular, what is the value of embracing uncertainty? What might we actually gain in our focus, in our purpose, in our intellectual freedom by consciously deciding to leave some questions unanswered?